Yeah, it helps to have certain statistics. It also helps to have a good definition. It's a very simple definition, actually. Racism is discrimination based off of, racial or cultural differences. So that's the easiest definition. There's more to that definition. If we open the Oxford or Webster, English dictionary, we can get a little more depth to that definition. But that's the easiest one she could have said, but she couldn't even say that, and that's one of the problems with these people that do these arguments. All right, guys, we're back again with the PEM podcast. It's Lou Dorian, and we're just working away on the site. Honestly, it's been a lot of hard work. It's been a hard summer. This has been one where it's just all work this summer. Haven't been doing a whole lot of fun stuff. Getting ready for upcoming events. We'll be going to SciCon in Denver in October. So that's going to be the next thing. Managing policy restrictions and figuring out this whole environment of social media and streaming channels has been an interesting challenge, and of course all of the censorship and what have you. It is a strange time we're living in. Meta and some of these platforms. Well, really Meta is the main one that's allowing a lot of mushroom business to happen, and that's interesting. But I'm actually going to be posting some videos on how to avoid getting scammed. A lot of people getting scammed out there, losing their money, giving people a bad taste in their mouth, which then leads them to think that everyone's a scam. And then there's fake products. There's the diamond shrooms debacle that made a bunch of people sick, and one person died. That was unfortunate. I think their product labeling wasn't what it needed to be. They were including Amanita muscaria in their product. That seems to be probably the main ingredient that led to the problem, because the people who showed up in the ER, and many of them ended up in the ICU, were having seizures. So we're managing all of those interesting things and trying to keep people safe and navigate around the scammers. At the same time, managing people and attitudes and egos. It's very interesting to manage public comments around, especially the business, versus a private DM or something like that. People want to make these public comments with accusations and things like this and expect that they're not going to get a stiff response. And they get a strong response because it's the company's reputation that's at stake, and so we have to respond directly and quickly. And so Casey's the guy on that does a lot of the responses there. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and going to release another video on some, I'm not sure when I'm going to release it, probably on Facebook, Instagram, a couple other things about people who react and act out and throw fits and do things like this, especially in relationships, and really coming to terms with what that means. A lot of times that's happening. People are they want to feel special. They want to feel like they are valued, and they want to feel loved. They want to feel these things, and because of their past trauma, toxic family life, and things like this, their behaviors in how they act out to get the responses they want can be toxic. And that becomes an interesting balancing act to manage someone who's in that state of mind. And that's really where the art of stalking comes in, or ego mitigation and ego management. It's this idea of dealing with the egoic mindset and at the same time being kind to the human being in question. And that's a strange razor's edge to walk, and very difficult balance to manage, one that I haven't fully mastered myself. So anyway, that's been kind of the week in a short overview there. We're going to get into some videos and do our normal responses and see what we got here.
Do you consider yourself a feminist?
As a nice, easy answer, yes.
Okay.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that women, if we were to get into a war, should be enlisted in the draft?
No.
I don't have like an opinion on it. Like, I feel like if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, if it doesn't, it doesn't.
I don't think women should be drafted because at the end of the day, it wouldn't really help the war in any much way. Like you said, the drill.
Whoa, that's a really sexist statement of you
No,
to
because
make.
like I'm making frontline physical, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're saying, oh, should they have a place in the war? Yeah, I feel like if a woman wants to be able to be in the war,
We're talking
yeah.
about force, though, right?
Yeah, no force.
So then, for those of you that said you were feminists, do you see any inconsistency between saying that you want equality, but you're cool with sending men to run into machine guns to protect your society? Does anyone wrestle with that?
How do you reconcile that? Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, crickets. That's funny. It's exactly what I was
If I was a
thinking.
feminist,
No,
but every
you only
feminist
want the
believes
equality
that.
that benefits women.
No.
Yeah, that is exactly what it is. Rules for thee, but not for me, as I like to say. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that goes on with women these days. Not all women, so let's not make it too generalized here. I don't want someone getting upset saying they're not that way. There are women that don't think in this way, but yeah, if you're equal, then you're equal in all ways, right? If we're going to have a discussion about, well, maybe we're equal in some ways, and maybe we're not equal in others, and maybe, you know, taking a deeper dive into how to navigate that, I think the problem is getting some sort of majority consensus, right? You know, sometimes you see these videos where the woman tries to step in the boxing ring with some guy or something like this, right? And it doesn't go well. Even sometimes trained women who have won championship fights in their own weight class with other women step into a combat sport situation with a man and do very poorly. And so they're not equal in those areas, and you know, they're not going to be equal in carrying heavy, you know, items into the battlefield. But you know, I think that there are ways you could see a woman being, if she wants to truly be equal, managing in a combat circumstance where she's not necessarily the one carrying a lot of the heavier items. You know, in the military, they'll have like a machine gunner. It's usually maybe a two-man team. I guess it depends on the machine gun and what military we're talking about. Usually the guys that were, like, for instance, in the Vietnam War carrying the big M60s, those were big guys because that was a big gun. The ammo they were using was 7.62 by 5.1 NATO or 308. Those rounds are heavy. They add up. You need a big guy who's able to manage and kind of carry that stuff around and be able to move from position to position, set up a machine gun. So women couldn't do that. But I don't think they want to face, I think those women, at least in that panel there, would not want to face life and death and really face those consequences. And so they really don't want that equality in that situation. And it's interesting what's happening these days. I've been wrestling with this myself. I want to be careful how I put this with this feminist argument, these things that are going on. It doesn't appear that a certain grouping of these people want equality. And I see that a lot. It's not just the feminist stuff. It can be the racial, you know, it can be political, it can be a lot of different things where someone is claiming they want equality, but as you look deeper at their actions and their attitude, they don't want equality at all. They want the power to swing in their direction, and they believe they're entitled to it because for X amount of time, in some circumstance, they were on the receiving end of being subjugated and you know, being dominated and mistreated in some way. So that seems to be a common theme in these movements. Not everyone involved is you know, necessarily has that mindset, but it seems that there's often a certain subset population of a movement that leans towards this attitude, and it certainly exists with feminism. And you know, been talking to a lot of guys. It's only anecdotal. This is where these arguments aren't really winnable, but I'm seeing with guys that I speak to this feeling that women are bullies these days, especially like younger, attractive women. They tend to be bullies, and we did a series of quotes. Sometimes we release quotes on the social media channels, and one of them was talking about how bullies come in all shapes, sizes, and genders. and it's not always physical bullying. And I do, I'm picking up a lot of that lately. I was a witness to this in an incident that I wish I had filmed in a very high-end restaurant in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, where two women decided to behave really poorly and were quite clearly bullies. And they aren't physical bullies. They use the system that backs them and the idea that they can't be smacked in the mouth and manhandled in that way, that they can just get away with really poor and disgusting behavior and a complete lack of respect or consideration, especially for men. And that kind of points further to, in those circumstances with those people, that it's not about an equal society or an equal sharing of power or, some sort of egalitarian environment, but they want to have all the power and behave however they want. That's pretty common. It's pretty common, and when you're dealing with that, I really messed up in that circumstance that I'm mentioning about that restaurant, because a powerful tool these days is the camera, right? Tyrants don't like the camera, so you can kind of see that with the police involvements that go wrong where constitutional rights are violated. You can see that with other aspects of power, including local municipal governments and the when they overstep their power as well, that people don't like to be caught red-handed on film. And so I like recording people and recording anyone who's behaving in this way that really shows their poor behavior and their self-centered attitude towards society and whatever their perceived opposition is. In this case, men, I guess, would be the idea. So yeah, I wish I had filmed that in that restaurant. That would have been really epic, but I didn't. So who knows if I'll ever get another opportunity like that. It was pretty amazing to see the gross, disgusting, entitled behavior. That was mind-blowing. So yeah, there's a discrepancy there, and it's common, and I don't think it's just women that do it. So I think it happens in these cases where you see some group that's trying to acquire more power for themselves, ostensibly under the idea of equality, but under the surface you'll see that it's not about equality at all. It's about as much power as they can garner for themselves, if not all of the power. Right, and that's concerning. You don't, I don't want someone to have power that has that mindset, because it doesn't go well for those that are at the, who are under the influence of that power from those individuals. So, yeah, it's common. It's very common. Nothing shocking there. I think that's pretty clear. So.
Why do I
There
have to
we
be
go.
accountable for the white race?
For yourself.
Right, so I'm racist, I'll take responsibility for
You
that.
probably are not racist.
Well,
But,
thank you. So then why do I have to comment on somebody else's racism?
but what you should do is take accountability for the racism around you.
But why would you say take responsibility? How can I take responsibility for somebody else's actions? Do you know that a black person is 18 and a half times more likely to shoot and kill a police officer than a police officer is to go and shoot an unarmed black man?
Is that the question that I asked you?
No, you asked a hypothetical about if I'm going to take accountability for a racist police officer.
So again,
But do you understand, if I inverted it on you, would you take accountability for all the blacks killing police in America?
that was funny.
No, would you? No. Why don't you take accountability for all the blacks killing police in New York?
Yeah, I think we're on the same page as the feminism one, and it's funny because I did mention race in that I see that in these movements, that it's this one-sided. It's not equal if it's only a one-way street. I'm not familiar with the statistics on, who's killing who here, cops and African Americans, and how that's all shaken out. Sure, it's a dangerous job to be a cop. I don't really know what those statistics are. People start, putting those statistics out there, and I have no way of verifying that what he said was actually true or not. But let's just look at it at face value. It did seem like there was a reluctance on, the darker gentleman's part to accept the same responsibility that he was asking his white counterpart to accept. So that that seems that seems one-sided to me. It seems it doesn't seem like an equal share in things, and that's always my concern. And I do have a concern when we're asked to take accountability, responsibility for other people's actions. That is a really interesting thing. In the military, in leadership circumstances, you are responsible for those underneath you, and that is how the military works. And so leadership has to be strong and make sure that all of the members at whatever level you are within the hierarchy of military, right, are toeing the line and doing their duties at the acceptable or above acceptable level that they need to be performing at. And if they aren't, then their commanding officers are held accountable for that. And that means that the commanding officers then put a lot of pressure on those underneath them to perform the way they need to. And of course that makes sense, but that is not a democratic institution. That is very much a dictatorship in the military. You don't have a vote in what goes on. You're given orders and you accept those orders. And so it's a very different structure than in society at large. So I'm not sure what that gentleman would like. So if we see someone being racist in society, let's say it's a white person and I'm white, and I'm out and I see someone being racist towards someone of a different color, then I guess the idea is I should step in. I should do something about it. And intervene in what way? At what level of risk do I need to take on? Do I need to, break laws and get myself in trouble? What's expected of me, right? Could I be, I could be taking a risk with my life, getting into an, altercation with someone who may be carrying a weapon. And that's a concern these days. I think there's a flaw in our society. We definitely are not cohesive anymore, where we've seen, in other, it's been a while since I've seen these videos come out and the talk was around, but there were, I guess I got to be careful what I say here, especially going on TikTok or something like that. Essays were happening on New York subways and things like that, and people were not intervening, just kind of turning their, kind of looking away and acting like it's not happening. That happened a few years ago. There was kind of a spate of incidents like this, and other things like that happen too, where it's assaults on the street, different things, and people are just too scared to get involved. It's funny because I haven't been there for that. When I was on the BART one day many years ago, which is the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, and surrounding areas equivalent of the subway, and there was a man who was, I guess, just mentally unhinged and mentally unwell, mentally ill, and he took out a razor and started slashing, just indiscriminately slashing people while inside the train car. And we were in one car over, so we could see what was happening, but there wasn't much we could do. But there were people who got involved. There was an old woman got slashed. When the train finally stopped and the guy got out, a couple of people had been slashed. Luckily, nothing was mortal. No one was mortally injured, but some serious slashings. One woman was cut pretty badly and bleeding bad. She had been cut on her arm. But people intervened. There were people who were definitely trying to stop this guy. People ran after him. Sadly, the police got involved and then apprehended the wrong person and pointed guns at him and all this stuff. And the bystanders, including myself, had to say, no, you got the wrong guy. He's getting away. So I've never been in these situations where people don't intervene. If someone's being racist, right, and speaking, I don't know, racial slurs in front of me, that gets touchy anyway, because we've gotten to this weird place now where we've said we have freedom of speech, but only if you say things that we're okay with, which I disagree with that. And now we've kind of categorized something as hate speech. Speech is one thing, and speech, that's another thing that wasn't defined here, and I'm a big believer in definitions. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about just someone spouting their hatred in a verbal way, or are we talking about actual discrimination where, someone won't serve somebody in a public place or won't let somebody in, or and I don't believe that's really happening that much. I'm sure it happens somewhere, but I think the 1960s and prior are a long time behind us now. So I don't think people are like being refused service or not allowed to use a restroom or anything like that. And I don't know how I would witness someone going, being discriminated against if it came to employment, or I guess if it was a police involved discrimination, then what can you do really other than film it and then try to follow through at some level of either utilizing media coverage or social media, or using civil rights activists and channels in that way, and attorneys that might fight for somebody in that situation. I think it's a strange debate that was happening there, is what I'm saying. I don't think enough definition was put there, but just from a pure idea of, are we seeking equality based off of the argument that was posed there, it didn't seem, again, it seems similar to the feminist thing. It didn't seem like we had a two-way understanding, like, okay, we'll take responsibility for whatever white racism happens. Will you take responsibility for whatever violence is happening within your racial group? And the answer seemed to be no. So it doesn't seem to be, again, something where this individual wanted true equality. And like I said, I think that's pretty common.
Black applicants to jobs are 50% less likely to get jobs if they have a black sounding name.
50%.
That's not even close to being. That's not even close to being true.
That is a literal.
In fact, it's the opposite.
I'm not going to
50%.
argue your lived experience. I'm not going to know.
See, now you have to listen to him under your rules, because a black person is going to say you're wrong.
I am. He can say I'm wrong. I know.
Come on up to the mic.
I know. I read your.
My name's Keemon Dixon. I have a really black name. Please tell me how 50% of my internships have been denied when I worked for Senator Mike Lee, Mayor Trent Stack, Speaker Mike Schultz.
Hold on.
I worked for Congressman Burgess Owens. I've actually worked on his campaign. I've worked on the campaigns of John Huntsman Jr. Please tell me how my black experience and my black name has not given me. Go ahead.
So.
That's interesting. Now we got kind of the flip side of this whole thing. So, yeah, I don't know why you would say things that, especially like 50%. First of all, 50% is very arbitrary. Like, where did you grab that statistic from? Maybe he heard it somewhere. Maybe he heard it or read it somewhere, saw it on social media. Who knows where he got that from? But it was interesting for a black man to step in and say, okay, that's doesn't seem right. He didn't address the statistic or correct it. He just said, here's my experience, and it doesn't measure up at all to that, or some of the people he knew or friends he knew. So, yeah, I don't know why people don't dig a little further before they say things. I can see how you can fall victim to that. I see that. Even when we first started this channel, there were times when people were somewhat convincing, and it was like, okay, yes, there was some different videos we did around, it was kind of sovereign citizen stuff and what your actual rights are when you're on the road. And it sounded, especially in one interview, this guy was very convincing about the history of his experience. And then later, I kind of did some deeper digging into that, and it was like, it didn't really hold up at all once I started to look into actual attorneys and what they had to say about it. And so I've always been fairly careful, but that made me even be more careful about saying, and about weighing in on certain things that I'm not sure of and that I don't have the information on. So I just don't know why you would come out and just say 50% of all black people are less likely or are likely to be denied employment of some sort. It's just guy's a young guy. I don't know where people just say things too easily and too quickly without thinking about it. I think that's a problem. That's kind of what I was even hinting to earlier about people who are commenting when I first opened this episode, about people who are commenting on our different posts and reels on Facebook and things like that. And they make comments. They have no idea who we are. They have no idea what's really going on. And they'll make comments from other experiences that they've had that aren't applicable to us. And they'll just act like they know. And I don't know why people do that. It's a strange thing, very odd. I don't have an answer for that. I'm not even going to go as far as saying it's ego. I think it is. I think it's linked to ego somehow. It's just a really strange thing to do. I don't understand it. Yeah.
Just because someone gets rich doesn't mean someone gets poor.
Yes, it does.
Explain that
In
to
this
me.
society, it does.
Explain that to me. When
As
you
someone
bought
gets
your hat, who got poor?
The people who made the hat.
Well, they voluntarily contributed their labor
they did
and they
not.
got paid for it.
No, they did not.
They didn't?
There's workers in other countries who are enslaved to make things that I'm wearing right now.
Then
and
why
that
would you buy it?
everyone's wearing. Because there's no other options in our capitalist country. There are no other options in our capitalist
That's
country.
totally and factually incorrect. Make your own clothes.
There aren't very many options for that.
Well, so what you're trying to say is you outsource your goods and services in a capital voluntary because you don't
think
want to
it's
spend
okay
the
for
time to
people
go
to be
make your own
enslaved?
clothes.
Do you think
No, what
it's
I'm trying to
okay
say is
for
you're
people to
making
be
the
enslaved to buy your
argument for
clothes?
I don't make my own clothes because I'm happy
No,
that someone
I
in
said buy your own
Southeast Asia
clothes.
gets a job so that I don't have to go make my own
And then
clothes.
they
I'm
burn
actually
alive
really
in
happy about
factories?
that.
So
Restate
that's
your
real
question.
nice.
Restate the
Then they
question.
burn alive in factories for making your clothes?
I'm really happy that Southeast Asia is experiencing economic renaissance so I don't have to go make my own clothes. In fact, some of these clothes
So
are
they
made in
burn
Italy
alive in
because they're
factories.
quite
So you're
expensive.
happy that people burn alive in factories so you can buy your clothes for cheaper?
I think that's a wonderful thing.
Okay, you're happy that people burn alive in factories.
Thank you for your feeling-induced emotional argument, and henceforth, we prove it again.
Feeling-induced emotional argument. So it's an interesting situation there. I don't think she did a very good job at all, and I like the ending when he says feeling-induced emotional argument. Yes. However, is it possible for everyone to have equal wealth? Especially, actually, I don't think it matters the structure, whether it's communism, socialism, capitalism, whatever. Is it possible for everyone to live as billionaires, let's say? And I would say no, it's not possible. And the reason it's not possible is what makes you truly wealthy? Let's remove the money from it. So if someone says, well, what's the dollar amount? Like, what's the cutoff point to be truly wealthy? That's not what I'm going to talk about now. It's not about the money. What it's about is the life that this person lives. And what do they live? They live a life of many, many people serving them. That's what is equating to their wealth. The people that serve them, the elite locations that they get to experience and live in. So obviously large houses, mansions, what have you, yachts, beachside, estates, those type of things. There isn't enough to go around, and these people, when they have that level of wealth, are able to push a button to receive basically whatever they want. So it wouldn't work if we were all at that level, because then who's going to serve who? There wouldn't be any service. The only way that this works is if we had a fully technologically advanced society with like robotics that were able to do everything. Then maybe we could live in a world where we were all sort of equal. Except for there's another aspect, and it kind of, to use a quote from House of Cards, which sadly got discontinued. Well, there was two House of Cards. There was actually a British version. It was much older, and they redid it, the American version, with Kevin Spacey, and the Kevin Spacey scandal ended it. But there was a quote, and the quote said, "Everything in life is about sex, except for sex itself is about power." So I would argue that, and this is a theory that I haven't brought up in a little while, but we did talk about it, that everything is actually about sex. That the original beginnings of agrarian civilizations that led to the potential for wealth, because without agriculture, there's no potential for wealth. Hunters and gatherers just live a completely different non-ownership existence with everything spiritually imbued. They just don't interact in the same way. So from that agrarian change, we start to see sexual restrictions, and then we start to see this structure built around inheritance and handing down wealth. And what we also see is, again, the rules for thee but not for me, is the wealthy oftentimes engage in this sort of sexual debauchery, right? Not everyone's Epstein and Epstein Island, but it's always been a prevalent part of the wealthy class that they are privy to certain special circumstances around their access to sexuality, especially with the more attractive members of our species, let's say. So wealth is a funny thing, is my point. Now, she's talking about Asian people burning in factories, burning alive in factories because they're making our clothing. I think that's a really vague and strange statement to make, because why did the factory burn down? Does every factory burn down just because these people are making these clothes? What were their options prior to the clothing factory? I think that's the argument the gentleman's making, is that, hey, at least they have a job now and are getting some income, where before, what were they doing? And I don't think either one of them is right, is what I'm saying. I don't think either side of that argument is correct. I don't know that one person getting rich always means that another person gets poor, or multiple people get poorer. But I do know that the hierarchy is necessary for there to be rich, middle class, and poor, whatever classes you want to have. Not everyone can be wealthy. It won't work. So it is a very difficult process. And I use the term the layer cake, because if you've ever heard of this movie, it's a good movie with Daniel Craig, the former James Bond, where the older, kind of most wealthy gentleman in that movie just talks about how it's the layer cake and how you're striving to climb layers. And I can tell you, the breaking through layers is extremely difficult, and it's difficult for a reason. There is a hierarchy and structure. I think it's very complicated. I don't think that I could sit here and in a nutshell expose exactly how it works. I think that it's very dynamic in understanding economics and how people are held in their positions and held at whatever standard of quality of life that they're at, including personal choices and, bad habits and behaviors that don't help them achieve a higher degree of wealth. But to break into the 1%ers, the billionaires club, you're going to find that to be very, very difficult. And it's very much baked into the fabric of economics that these are the royalty, and not everyone can be royalty. Otherwise, then there is no royalty. You have no service. You don't have the perks of being wealthy anymore. You're just equal, and you just get an equal share, and you don't have the specialness that comes with being wealthy. So I think both of them are wrong. As far as kind of money being the root of all evil, and these people who are suffering, it's funny because I've heard it said that too little money is not the problem in the world, or too little money is the problem in the world. It's never too much money that's the problem. So like, if someone who has what causes crime, someone doesn't have what they need. They don't have enough money. If they had enough money, they wouldn't be involving themselves in crime, right? But again, just from a logic kind of standpoint, there's no way to have a completely even system and have an economic system the way it is. It doesn't work. Someone has to be at the top, and they're maintaining that position, and getting into that position is going to be very hard. So I think that would be nice. This is an interesting topic to me, because I think it's very complicated, and there are people who are far more educated than I am on the subject of economics, and could talk about this, I think, in a much better way, and add some layers to this discussion that maybe I could pick up on, and we could work on kind of understanding this a little better. Improvement of quality of life for certain folks based off of jobs that most of us here in the U.S. and the West wouldn't take is a thing that's happened in many places, where people have had terrible quality of life, and then because of certain industries that emerged and jobs that were offered, their lives were improved. Even when we're talking about mining and things like this, terrible, terrible jobs that I wouldn't want to do, still was better than this person starving, and having zero infrastructure, and maybe having horribly unsanitary conditions and people getting very sick, whatever, and then you have an improvement in quality of life. So I get what the young woman wants to do here. She's calling attention to the flaws of the economic world in which we live in, but I don't think anybody's confused about that. The economic structure of this world is flawed, and there are people living much better lives. But yeah, the way she went about it, it wasn't well thought out. It wasn't a good argument, and he kind of tore her apart. But I think he's to say he's happy, like I'm just so overjoyed that I can wear, Chinese factory-made clothing, and someone, I wouldn't say that. That's going a little too far. I'm not overjoyed about this. The circumstances in the world, I think the economic circumstances are going to start getting much more difficult. I mean, we're seeing the effects of inflation here. Unreal. Someone sent me a screenshot yesterday. They got a pizza, a salad, and a drink. They paid $83. I'm sure it wasn't pizza. It wasn't like Domino's or something like that. But still, right? Inflation levels have gotten so insane. Where are we headed with that? But I would like to have, for a discussion like this, more than just one economist weigh in on, at an even bigger picture level, like what I'm calling attention to, that there's no way that we could all be billionaires. And I'd like to see someone who's a true economist talk about that and what keeps the structure of our economy the way it is. But I don't feel I'm qualified to really discuss that. I don't know enough to weigh in there.
Charlie Kirk believes that TikTok is turning children trans.
This is Chloe Cole. She's a detransitioner.
In my experience, I learned about transgenderism through the internet at roughly about the age of 11 or 12. And I mean, it captivated me. I had body image issues, and it felt like I found the explanation for as to why I felt so different from the women around me. This has left permanent effects on my body. I might not be able to have children. I don't have my breasts anymore. I have complications from the puberty blockers, the testosterone, and the surgery.
That's
3
correct.
years after I've stopped taking all of them.
I'm very suspicious about, okay, but I understand.
Are you calling her a liar?
No, but I am saying that I'm pretty sure a mastectomy, that's not in the trans guidelines of how people should transition.
Oh, it is.
No, it's 100%. Look at
It's in the WPATH guidelines.
WPATH guidelines that came out last
They've been lowering the age guidelines for years.
The whole trans thing is really a strange discussion about children. The children aspect, and that's where people got really upset over this whole issue. And I can understand why they got upset. It is very inconsistent in the logic. That's the problem that I have with it, is we don't allow children to make many decisions about their own lives. So we don't let them smoke cigarettes. We don't let them choose, certain drugs, alcohol, let's say. We don't let them vote. We don't let them join the armed services. We don't let them go into certain establishments. We don't allow them to view certain types of content. And yet, we got into this trans discussion, and we allow them to make life-altering, maybe lifelong lasting, impactful changes to their body. How does that make any real sense? Is the question I ask from just a basic logic standpoint. I'm not weighing in at all on whether trans is a good thing or if people are, mentally well that feel that they're trans and want to change their gender or anything like that. We don't even have to discuss that. Just logic, just basic logic. We don't allow children to make these many decisions in their lives because our understanding is that children aren't equipped, their brains haven't developed, their rationale hasn't developed to a point to make decisions that have a certain amount of impact in their life, that have gravity to them, that are important decisions. We don't allow children to do that. Why would we allow them to make a medical decision based off of an identity issue that that can change throughout the course of someone's development, and they might have a change of heart? So it does seem to be very inconsistent in the logic that we've decided this is the way to go, and there's a major concern in the motivations for why we would allow that inconsistency. Sorry. That's my main problem with this whole thing, is that logically speaking, it doesn't make sense when we know children are very impressionable, they can have a difficult time with the social environment, going through schooling and their peers and things like this, and they could make just a knee-jerk decision, and we're going to allow them to make this life-impacting decision. And again, the motivations are my concern, because there's money at the bottom of this, and that's the scary part. Anytime there's real money, and there's real money, so someone who opts for this type of change is going to be a lifelong customer. And there's nothing better than a lifelong customer if you're a business, especially one that's spending the kinds of money that we're talking about, surgeries and medications and expensive medical interventions that will require a lifetime of maintenance. That is concerning to me, because there's a huge incentive there for those that are going to benefit financially to push an agenda. And so that's where I start to go, the logic doesn't add up. We already see that we don't allow children to make other types of decisions about their health. And yet, in this particular case, we will allow it. And when you look at it, you go, we'll allow it, and there's someone to gain a lot of money from it. That just worries me. You know, I'm not even weighing in. I'm not weighing in on the trans argument. I let the rest of you guys do that. But logically speaking, I see a problem, and I'm always looking for where the money. You know, they say follow the money. I'm always following the money, and it seems to me there's a lot of money to be made. So, yeah.
And now,
What does your hat say?
ICE.
What does that stand for?
Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement.
Wow.
Have a nice day. Let's have a conversation. No, 100%, guys. I'm not going to press. Thank you. See? I'm not going to. No, that's not. Hey, put it on mine. We got to go shortly. I
got a question.
Sure. What was your name again? I'm sorry.
I don't think I told you. My name's Mercury.
Nice to meet you. Well, nice to re-meet you, I should say.
What do you hope to get out of this? Why are you here?
Okay, I've been asked that question a lot. First of all, that question should not even have to be asked, but when people stop talking, really bad stuff starts. When marriages stop talking, divorce happens. When church starts happening, they fall apart. When civilizations stop talking, civil war ensues. When you stop having a human connection with someone you disagree with, it becomes a lot easier to want to commit violence against that group. Whether it be the great genocide, the horrible genocides of the last 100 years, people stop talking with each other because they lose their humanity. I wish we could be here without having my hat thrown off and stuff, but what we as a culture have to get back to is being able to have reasonable disagreement where violence is not an option.
Have to agree with him there. Absolutely, and that's what I'm saying about the censorship that's going on the social media and streaming channels. The censorship is an attempt to stop those discussions, in my opinion, and it leads to far greater problems. I've said this a few times now. I agree with him 100% there. Do I agree with ICE in the hat he's wearing? That's a different discussion. I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but the fact that his particular attitude is one of let's have this discussion and continue having this discussion instead of just shutting down and then potentially leading to far more problematic consequences. I agree with 100%. Keep the conversation going. Keep it going. Always keep the interaction going. And if you're able to self-regulate your emotions and not violently rip a hat off someone's head, that was an absurd thing for someone. This is juvenile. It's a very juvenile thing to do. That's the thing here. We have a bunch of children in this society that haven't, grown up. They haven't done any self-growth. They haven't done any look at themselves, and aren't able to, interact with someone who doesn't agree with them or believe what they believe. That is a major problem with, I think, with our country right now. One of the dangers with our enormous division, and then, we haven't agreed upon how we should discuss these things. One thing I think is very important that's missing from a lot of these discussions is that we allow people to have non-logical arguments and not follow a certain debate structure. That, I believe, is what education is supposed to help people with and instill in them an understanding of basic logic and how to debate certain things and apply critical thinking. We seem to have lost that, so we'll have people sort of like the video before this one with the emotional argument type of thing that happens where your logic isn't there, your information isn't backing you up, your critical thinking skills haven't been brought to bear on this. If we had much more of an educated population to understanding basic logic and understanding that you can't, in a pick and choose way, apply logic, but it has to be global for the arguments to add up to something cohesive that makes sense. If we had people more on that page, I think we'd get a lot further, and people were able to, instead of reacting emotionally, being able to interact with folks that maybe disagree with them. We would have a much better chance at having a more cohesive and harmonic society. But I have to agree with him 100% on that. The issues that are taking place, and that's another thing, a lot of times people want to debate these issues and don't want to look at the root, truly go to the root fundamental, like something like immigration and ICE and what's really going on there. I mean, this stuff, as I say all the time, goes back to the beginning of agriculture and the beginning of what has become this world we live in, which is, it's not a happy place. We don't live in a great and wonderful place. This world is not that. And what's causing it, right? What are the actual root fundamentals of what's happening in our society? And it all comes back to when we first began farming and when we first started going to war and enslaving each other. And that's where it all began, and it's not going to stop as long as we are at the particular level of consciousness we're at. This is where my theories come in on kind of the meaning of our lives here in this universe and everything. We are stuck in an ego-run society and world that's based off of ownership and based off of something that constantly keeps us outside of a harmonic existence with each other and with our environment. And because of that, we are steadily marching towards some sort of event horizon that appears could be a mass extinction event. And legislation and enforcement are never going to solve this problem because it's just the same application, same solution to an old problem that isn't being solved. We need people to become more aware, more conscious, and become more cohesive in the way they interact. We need to become more like ants. Ants are very interesting. They don't issue orders to each other. They just know what to do. And as human beings, we don't seem to know what to do. And that seems to be a big problem if you ask me. So that's what I got to say about that.
I noticed you're wearing an American Lives Matter shirt. What is your message to this audience right now by wearing that t-shirt?
Well, I think that we should put Americans above foreigners.
You know that the whole point of the movement, like, that came with Lives Matter was originally for Black Lives Matter?
Yes, I'm intentionally appropriating it.
Would you take the time to recognize a group of people who have been marginalized historically and who are now asking for the same rights?
What rights do white people have that blacks don't?
So the issue is, it's not necessarily written in the law.
Oh, so it's like hidden.
That's the whole point. That's how marginalizing works.
Oh, so it's kind of like, it's like a ghost. You see it one day and you don't. Name one thing a white person can do that a black person cannot do.
So the issue is racism, okay?
What is racism? Can you define to me what racism is?
Racism, well, I don't have the exact description as it is seen in like AP Style or like Wikipedia.
Yeah, but let me ask you a question. What percentage of young blacks have both a mom and a dad raising them? 25%. So only 1 out of 4 blacks in America have a mom and a dad around. Do you think that is a bigger issue to address than racism? We spend all this time talking about white supremacy and racism, and we don't talk about how we need more dads in black homes.
Interesting. Yeah, it helps to have certain statistics. It also helps to have a good definition. It's a very simple definition, actually. Racism is discrimination based off of, racial or cultural differences. So that's the easiest definition. There's more to that definition. If we open the Oxford or Webster, English dictionary, we can get a little more depth to that definition. But that's the easiest one she could have said, but she couldn't even say that, and that's one of the problems with these people that do these arguments. Black lives matter, American lives matter, foreigners aren't worth as much as Americans. That starts to go to a place that I don't agree with. That's ego, if you ask me. Why should American lives be worth more than a Mexican life or a Chinese life or a Russian life or a French life or a German life or anyone? That is a problem. If you ask me, it's a major problem. And I get that it's also part of kind of political structure of, I guess, the border argument and securing our borders and that stuff. I'm assuming that's kind of where that comes from, American Lives Matter. But I think that's it's too bad that people see things that way. Everyone's life should matter, regardless of where you're from. Because if they don't matter, you can watch some PETA videos, show you what it's like when a life doesn't matter. Watch a PETA video on some of the atrocities that are done to animals. It's unreal what is done when a life doesn't matter. So I just have a problem with that. I don't think that we're any more important than anyone else or anything else for that matter. That comes back to the indigenous kind of idea, where like a beetle on the ground is not more important than I am. I don't, as a species don't sacrifice themselves for other species, so I know I'm not going to do that either. I wouldn't sacrifice my life for a beetle. But at the same time, I don't think I'm actually that any really more important than it is. It's just my will to survive is why I'm not going to take that route. But I tend to treat things in my environment as much as possible with where I'm at with our current world, with as much respect as I can. And I don't think that everyone kind of sees it that way. And again, this is all comes back to the original place of where it comes from. And it comes from 10,000 years ago when we began farming and we began ownership and the institution of inheritance and started to make choices about whether we were going to be a feudal society, a capitalist society, a communist society, a socialist society, a dictatorship. All these different directions were chosen, but they all lead to the same place. To some degree, some worse than others. It appears when you choose communism, you never make it there. You always get stuck in socialism, and that seems to be really authoritative. But none of them are great. None of them are good. None of them end in any type of utopia. But those who are arguing these arguments with someone like that gentleman there, they're not good at arguing it, and they always start in the middle. I don't want to start in the middle. Let's start with where it all began, and then we can arrive at certain conclusions. And people don't even want to do that. I guarantee you, if I was there to discuss this with him, he wouldn't want to engage with me because it's not going to be. What happens is people just say, "Oh, well, that's just so outlandish and ridiculous. We're not even going to consider that because we're here now 10,000 years later, and this is the world we live in." Yeah, but this world we live in is in jeopardy. We're headed towards a serious problem. And I think that people, just because of the fact that we haven't had a serious problem yet, we have had World War II and World War I and the dropping of nuclear weapons, and we've had some serious pollution and some fairly cataclysmic events happen in human history. I think we're headed for one that's going to be worse than we've possibly ever seen before. It will be similar on some level to the Black Plague. I think that would have felt very apocalyptic to be in the in the 1300s in Europe or Western Asia or something like that, and be experiencing a 75% death rate. That would have been frightening and very odd. But I think we could be headed there. Hopefully not in our lifetimes, but it could be, and that's because of this trajectory we're on of seeing ourselves as separate, seeing ourselves as at odds with each other, at odds with our own species. Meanwhile, we're killing off the rest of our natural world and not really seeing it as a one species thing. To say American Lives Matter is to see us as not really one species. And to also see just everything as somehow less than who we are here in America, I guess, which is crazy. I think that's one of the nastier mindsets, actually, when Americans go somewhere as tourists and other countries see us and we're like, yeah, America's the greatest country on earth. I imagine that's very offensive. And I don't think we're the only ones that do it. I was actually talking to a family that lives in Malaysia. They live in Jakarta, and they were talking about some of the Russians and their attitudes as tourists, and it sounded fairly similar to us. And it's not a very flattering mindset, honestly, and it's not one that I think is leading to our potential for a harmonic existence with each other and our environment. Anyway, yeah, these people aren't good at arguing their point, so they don't do a good job at really addressing these issues.
I want to go to a college campus where it's very diverse.
I would rather have an excellent college campus.
I personally think
You have
that
to
the
choose.
most diverse campus would be the most excellent.
No, can you give me an example where race is prioritized and excellence is achieved?
There's not.
Yeah, it doesn't exist, right. So
Because
as Harvard, and that's fine. We have clarity. I'm not even making you feeling bad. You just have to be clear what you want. I think that we should try to be the best in all that we do, regardless of what skin color achieves. If that means 100 Asians are going to be in every Harvard math class, so be it. The essence should be a prioritization on competency and merit, not on just everyone, we have a beautiful, everyone looks different but thinks the same.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even see how you argue that point there. I want to choose my words wisely here, but if we're allowing race to be more important than the merits of the performance, then aren't we engaging in some sort of racism there? Isn't there some sort of discrimination happening if we're passing over someone who performed better than someone of a certain cultural background or skin color, and yet we place the person who had a poorer performance in the position, or given the spot as a student, or the intern or whatever it is? That to me seems racist. But I don't know how we don't, other people don't agree with that logic. Yeah, if it's not about race, then it should be about performance. And yeah, I agree with that. I don't see how it's possible to disagree with it, because again, logically speaking, that seems very, 1 + 1 = 2. So I don't get how you have any dispute there. But we do, and we have affirmative action. We have all these things, which were instituted, I know, to reverse what was at the time a system that had the structures of racism built into it, and so they were reversing that. But there's a point now, I think, that we're getting to that point where we can say, hey, racism may exist out there. There are racist people out there, but their numbers are dwindling more and more, and I don't think that's our biggest problem. And it seems like it's an easy thing to latch onto, this racism idea, which, from a perspective of mental health and psychedelic therapies, even where I come from, there's this idea of, past trauma, even generational trauma. It does exist, but that doesn't make it a valid argument to maintain these type of systems that do actually reinforce racism. It just means that we need to help people get more therapy and get more work done to relieve them of that past trauma. So yeah, I think that's a very basic idea that someone's performance and the merits of their performance and their abilities are what should be more important than the way they look or the way they talk or the color of their skin. I believe that that's very similar to what actually Dr. Martin Luther King was saying in his famous speech. So yeah, interesting that people try to argue that. All right, guys, that's it. I think a lot of this one you got to see is a couple of things. Sometimes the rules for thee but not for me type of argument, the one-sided where someone is trying to, or some group is trying to sway power in their favor based off of what really comes down to a faulty logic when you look at it from the perspective of what's your goal. Oh, our goal is equality. Well, this isn't equality then. There's a faultiness in the logic. So you're either being disingenuous or you just don't understand equality, but which is it? Versus, the other side of it where we see people who just seem completely inept at arguing at all. They don't have a way to debate things very well. They have just this emotional reaction and emotionally based argument, which to me comes off as a lack of being educated, honestly. So you may feel all kinds of things about what's going on, but feelings don't win arguments, and they don't lead to any type of structure that we can utilize effectively. We need logic, and we need things based in logic to kind of manage our world in a way that does lead to some sort of equality and something that actually makes sense and doesn't have a ton of inconsistencies and hypocrisies and things like that. So it does seem like, I don't know from the past to now if we're losing that ability more. I think people from an older generation would say we are, that there was a time when people were able to logically argue things a bit better, perhaps. But I don't know if that's actually true. I have no way of knowing that. But we're definitely seeing a lot of examples of people who seem to be not very well equipped to argue, with people. And then I wanted to share one more thing with you. Sometimes people think they need to win every single point in order to win an argument. And that actually doesn't work. Oftentimes it'll work against your favor. Sometimes it's better, because it'll fall within the framework of full logic, to concede certain points and go, okay, you're right there. Oh, okay, I'm willing to think about that now. Maybe there's some merit to what you're saying there. But then in the big picture of things, sometimes when doing that, you lead people into your logical side of your argument more, and sometimes that can sway the argument into where they actually lose the argument, logically speaking, because you were willing to give a bit there, and then that ends up kind of merging with your argument even better. If you're able to mentally maneuver in that space, we would need more specifics and specific examples there. But yeah, having to be right at every point can do you a disservice sometimes. So that's it for this one, guys. We'll be back at it again next week. So we'll see you then.